Welcome to the Inner Essence, a space of mindfulness, spiritual awakening, and reconnecting with your true self. Breath, be present, and begin your journey with it.
Have you noticed how life keeps repeating the same patterns, no matter how much effort you put into changing them? Different faces, new places, yet the same emotional echoes keep returning. It's as if the universe were caught on a loop, replaying your unfinished reactions. But what if the pattern isn't punishment at all? What if your timeline shifts completely the moment the observer, you, stops resisting? Today we're going to look at what truly happens energetically and mentally when you stop fighting the flow of experience and allow reality to reorganize itself around your awareness. You think you're watching life unfold, that you're simply perceiving what is happening around you. But look closer. Most of the time you're not observing reality, you're editing it. Every time you say this shouldn't be happening, every moment you brace against what is, you're quietly rewriting the present into a version that feels safer, smaller, more predictable. That hidden editing impulse is the first layer of resistance. It's subtle, almost invisible, because it masquerades as awareness. But it isn't awareness. It's control wearing the mask of observation. Imagine standing before a river, trying to stop its current with your bare hands. That's what the mind does when it tries to manage outcomes, to fix what's already in motion. You feel the friction in your chest, the tightening in your jaw, the quickening of thought. The body becomes a weather report of your inner stance toward reality. Every muscle, every heartbeat whispering one message: I'm not safe until this changes. Yet the river doesn't care. It flows through your resistance, as if your tension were transparent. The more you push, the more turbulent the surface becomes. This is the invisible mistake of the observer, believing that awareness means interference. You think you can watch life clearly while secretly demanding that it conform to your expectation. But in that moment, you're no longer observing, you're filtering. You're not meeting what's in front of you, you're negotiating with it. Every negotiation introduces noise into the signal. You lose the raw data of the now, replaced by the static of your own narrative. Psychology has a term for this subtle distortion: confirmation bias. Once your mind decides how reality should be, it unconsciously gathers only the evidence that supports that storyline. You stop perceiving what's true and start perceiving what's useful to the identity you're protecting. The scientist inside you is no longer testing reality. He's defending a hypothesis. That's the moment your timeline freezes into repetition, because what can change if every new event is forced to confirm the same old story? Pause for a moment. Feel where in your body this illusion hides. Maybe it's in the forehead trying to figure things out. Maybe it's in the chest, tensing before every conversation or task, as if each moment were a small battle to win. Notice that. Don't fix it. Just see it. The seeing itself begins to dissolve the illusion, because once you observe the mechanism of control, you realize you never needed to hold the river. You only needed to recognize that you were gripping it. This illusion runs deep. It hides inside our language. I need to make this work. I have to get it right. I must stay in control. But control is not clarity. Control is fear disguised as responsibility. It tells you that if you don't manage reality, it will collapse. Yet how many times in your life has reality reorganized itself perfectly when you finally let go? How many situations resolved the moment you stopped forcing them? That's not coincidence, it's coherence. Reality self-corrects when you stop distorting its flow. And here lies the paradox. The more you try to observe correctly, the more you interfere. Observation, in its pure form, is receptive, like a mirror that reflects without altering what it sees. But our minds, conditioned by survival and performance, can't stand still. They want to do something with what they see. They want to control the reflection. So the mirror fogs with effort and clarity disappears. Every moment you resist what is, you step slightly out of sync with the real timeline and into an internal simulation, a mental version of life where you're trying to fix what doesn't actually exist anymore. That lag creates emotional turbulence, anxiety, irritation, fatigue. You think the world is repeating, but it's you who's replaying the same unprocessed frame. If you want to test this, pick one simple area of your day, a traffic delay, an unfinished task, a conversation that didn't go as planned. Instead of trying to control or fix it, observe your impulse to interfere. Watch the mind reach for control. Then, for a few seconds, do nothing. Let the river move. Feel how the body softens, how attention widens, how the moment begins to breathe again. In that pause, you're no longer an editor. You're the witness returning to pure observation. There's a hidden detail in this act of seeing that most people never notice, and everything revolves around it. Because what actually happens when you resist isn't just psychological, it's physical. The energy of resistance has a measurable effect, a kind of vibrational interference that shapes the field of what can or cannot happen next. When you resist, something measurable occurs, not metaphorically, but energetically and physiologically. The body tightens, the breath shortens, the field of perception narrows. It's a full body contraction around an internal no. That no is not just emotional, it's electrical. Tiny signals race through your nervous system, releasing stress hormones, preparing you to fight or flee. But there's nothing to fight, nothing to flee. You're battling an event that already exists. The energy has nowhere to go, so it loops, repeating, amplifying, replaying. That looping is the physics of resistance. Imagine tuning a radio. When the dial isn't aligned with the signal, you hear static, overlapping frequencies interfering with one another. Resistance creates that same static in consciousness. You're still transmitting thought, still radiating energy, but it's incoherent, distorted by inner tension. Incoherence doesn't just stay inside you. It echoes into the field around you. Other people sense it, situations respond to it, and life starts to mirror back the same interference pattern. That's why, when you're resisting something, you start noticing more of it. The field is not punishing you. It's just resonating with your dominant vibration. Physics calls this entrainment. Two oscillating systems tend to synchronize their rhythms when in proximity. A heart under stress will entrain its environment toward stress. A coherent, relaxed heart stabilizes the field around it. You can test this in the simplest way. Walk into a room filled with tension and notice how quickly your body mirrors it. Now, enter a calm, grounded space. Your system aligns again. Resistance is just internal entrainment toward disorder. Every thought carries a frequency, not in a mystical sense, but as a pattern of neural activity. When a thought of, "I can't accept this," fires repeatedly, it wires a pathway of contraction through the brain's limbic and motor circuits. The body becomes an instrument, playing one repetitive note. That's why resistance feels heavy. You're cycling the same energy without release. The field of possibilities narrows, not because fate has closed its doors, but because your attention has locked into one narrow band of perception. Now here's the subtle but crucial part. Resistance doesn't mean disliking something. It means feeding it with oppositional energy. You can disagree with what happens and still remain fluid. But when emotion fuses with thought, when the no becomes personal, you start building an energetic structure around the event. You hold it in place. Like a magnet fixing filings into rigid lines, your charged attention organizes reality into repetition. Let's make this tangible. Think of a time when someone said something that bothered you. You replayed it in your head, analyzing every word. Hours later, you still felt tense. The event had long passed, but the resistance persisted. What's happening there is feedback. Your mind broadcasting interference, your body amplifying it, your environment reflecting it back. The loop self-sustains until something breaks the pattern, usually a moment of deep breath, laughter, or surrender. That break isn't mystical, it's physical coherence being restored. When you let go, even for a few seconds, the nervous system shifts from sympathetic, fight or flight, to parasympathetic, rest and integrate. Heart rate variability increases, electromagnetic coherence rises, and your brain begins to produce slower, more synchronous waves. The field reorganizes around that calm. Possibilities that were previously blocked become perceptible again. It's not that the universe suddenly changed, your interference reduced, and so reality could self-arrange in your favor. If you want to observe this directly, you can try a simple test. The next time something irritates you, don't analyze the situation. Study the frequency of your reaction. Where does the contraction begin? The chest, the stomach, the throat? Stay with the physical sensation without labeling it as right or wrong. You'll notice that the intensity peaks and then starts to dissolve. In that dissolution, the field begins to open. The mind may still comment, but the energy beneath it is already reorganizing. This is the quiet science of consciousness, not philosophy, but feedback. Every emotional reaction sends a pulse into the field. Every act of non-resistance lets that energy discharge. Resistance is the friction between your current and what is. Letting go isn't passivity, it's conductivity. A conductive system doesn't store charge, it allows flow. Think of lightning. It doesn't fall from the sky at random, it travels along paths of least resistance. The same law governs synchronicity. When your inner resistance drops, the current of life finds you easily. Events align not because you manifested them, but because you're no longer blocking their natural path. The act of resisting may feel like protection, but it's actually interference with the intelligence that's already trying to move through you. The universe doesn't need you to force outcomes. It needs you to stop distorting the field. Every time you relax into what's happening, the noise reduces, the pattern clarifies, and coherence returns. And yet this power of observation cuts both ways. Because if awareness can reorganize matter, it can also trap it. The same principle that frees energy can also freeze it, if the observer doesn't know they're doing it. That's where the paradox begins. The moment observation turns into fixation, the field obeys the fixation instead of the flow. In the quantum world, observation doesn't just record reality, it alters it. When scientists send single particles through a slit, those particles behave like waves of probability, expanding into endless potential. But the moment someone measures them, they collapse into one defined outcome. The act of observation decides what will be seen. For decades, physicists argued about what this means. Some said it was merely a measurement problem. Others saw a doorway to something much deeper, that consciousness, not matter, might be the fundamental canvas of existence. Now think of that principle outside the lab. Every time you fix your attention on an event in your life, a problem, a desire, a fear, you're not just noticing it, you're collapsing it. You're bringing one version of possibility into form. The more emotionally charged your observation, the stronger that collapse becomes. Your mind, like the quantum instrument, decides which version of reality stabilizes in your awareness. But here's where the paradox begins. The same observer that can bring possibilities into form can also keep them frozen. Science shows that the act of measuring changes the outcome. Spirituality says the act of judging does the same. When you look at a situation with tension, you trap it inside the frequency of your perception. You stop it from evolving because your observation isn't neutral. It's encoded with resistance, preference, fear. You believe you're seeing what's happening, but you're actually seeing your projection of what should or shouldn't be happening. Reality obeys that lens until you change the quality of your seeing. Let's look at this through the nervous system again. When attention locks onto something with emotional charge, your body produces a feedback loop of chemistry and focus. Cortisol, adrenaline, heart rate acceleration. They amplify the very thing you're observing. You feel danger, so you see danger. You expect rejection, so you interpret small gestures as proof. The observer creates evidence of its own bias, just like a scientist unintentionally influencing a delicate experiment by being too close to it. You become the variable that skews the results, and this is not abstract. Every one of us has lived this experiment, waiting for a call that doesn't come, feeling time slow down, imagining reasons, tightening inside the story. The observation becomes a magnet for the emotion attached to it. The more you focus, the denser the timeline becomes. The moment you lose interest, when you stop gripping the outcome, the call appears, the tension dissolves, the reality reorganizes. Something in you let the wave return to its natural flow. What ancient teachings called non-attachment might simply be the art of observing without collapsing possibilities too soon, to stay curious instead of certain, to witness rather than label. Both science and spirituality circle this same insight from different directions. Science measures the mechanism, spirituality trains the mind that operates it. Together, they reveal that the true creative power of consciousness isn't in forcing outcomes, but in perceiving with precision and neutrality. You could think of it like photography. If the lens is dirty or the aperture too narrow, light can't pass through cleanly. The photo you get will always be distorted. In consciousness, resistance is that dirt, judgment, fear, expectation. Clear the lens and suddenly light organizes into sharpness. You didn't make the scene more beautiful, you just stopped distorting it. That's the observer paradox in its purest form. Observation shapes what it sees, but only clear observation allows reality to reveal its order. This is why practices like meditation, mindful breathing, or even quiet noticing are not about escaping the world. They're about cleaning the instrument. When the mind becomes still enough, it stops imposing patterns and starts perceiving them. That's when synchronicity appears, not as magic, but as coherence. Reality mirrors the precision of your inner field. But here lies the hidden danger. Once you discover that observation has power, the ego tries to use it. You start observing with intent to control, to manipulate outcomes, to manifest. And the moment you do, the old interference returns. Observation becomes fixation, curiosity turns into pressure. You've stepped back into resistance, only now dressed in spiritual language. The field doesn't distinguish between material control and energetic control. Both create distortion. The paradox is that true creative power only emerges when you stop trying to create. The moment you stop forcing, possibilities multiply. The universe isn't withholding, it's waiting for you to stop collapsing its potential into the same narrow expectation. What you call waiting for reality to change is often reality, waiting for you to release the grip of observation. You can sense this physically. When attention softens, the body opens, breath slows, perception expands. The world starts to move again. The observer no longer freezes the frame. The movie continues. And that's the key to the next revelation. When you resist what is, when you fight the current of experience, you don't just distort the present. You begin generating a parallel timeline, an echo of your own resistance that traps you in emotional time rather than real time. When you resist what's happening, you don't stop reality. You split from it. The external timeline keeps unfolding moment by moment, but your consciousness begins looping in a different track, an emotional simulation that no longer matches the real flow of events. That's what resistance does. It doesn't just create tension, it creates time distortion. Think of it this way. The present moment is like a moving train. It's always in motion, always carrying you forward. When something happens that you don't want, a conversation, a result, an outcome, and you decide even subtly, this shouldn't be happening, you step off that train. The train keeps moving, but you're standing still on the platform, replaying the scene, arguing with it in your head, rewriting the past. That's emotional time. It's an artificial timeline built entirely out of resistance. You can feel this split physically. The body stays in the present, the heart still beats, the breath still moves, but the mind is elsewhere, in a moment that no longer exists. This creates a kind of temporal friction. The body is here, the observer is not. Over time, that mismatch drains energy. You feel tired, impatient, anxious, as if life were dragging you instead of carrying you. But life isn't dragging you. You're lagging behind your own timeline. Neuroscience has a term for this kind of disconnection: prediction error. When what the brain expects doesn't match what's actually happening, it produces stress signals, trying to reconcile the two realities. Resistance is a prolonged prediction error, a refusal to update the model of how things should be. Instead of letting the nervous system adapt, you keep it cycling through outdated information. The result? Repetition. The same emotional movie plays again and again because you never allow the reel to finish. Every story of being stuck follows this pattern. You resist a job, a relationship, a version of yourself, and yet you keep reliving it in new forms. Different names, same theme. You might change cities, change partners, change careers, but if the internal resistance remains, the timeline simply reconfigures around it. The universe doesn't punish, it mirrors. It keeps reflecting the frequency of unresolved resistance until the observer integrates it. Only then does the main track, the real timeline, open up again. To see this more clearly, watch how time behaves when you're resisting. Minutes feel longer. The day feels heavier. You count hours, replay conversations, analyze outcomes. Your awareness becomes trapped in linear time, measuring, comparing, judging. But when you accept something, even reluctantly, time instantly shifts. You re-enter the flow. Hours disappear. Events rearrange. People respond differently. The world feels lighter not because it changed, but because you stepped back onto the train of now. On an energetic level, resistance acts like a frequency gate. When you hold a strong emotional no, your field contracts, limiting what can enter your awareness. The more you resist, the narrower your perception becomes. You can't see opportunities, signs, or synchronicities because your signal bandwidth is filled with internal noise. You might even say resistance is the act of broadcasting an alternate universe, one made entirely of your unmet expectations. You live inside that broadcast until something shakes the frequency loose. Here's a simple example. Imagine you're waiting for a response, an email, a message, a decision. The more you check, the more time seems to slow down. You tell yourself, why isn't this happening yet? That's the moment your attention detaches from the real timeline and begins creating a parallel one. You've entered the echo. The external event will happen when it happens, but your consciousness is now living in a simulated future that doesn't exist. The paradox is that the very energy of waiting delays the outcome because you've shifted from flow to fixation. Resistance is, in essence, an attempt to live in two realities at once, the actual present and the imagined one you wish existed instead. And that split is exhausting because consciousness isn't built to divide. It's built to move coherently through what is. Every act of resistance creates a lag, a delay between experience and acceptance, and that delay becomes the seed of repetition. The longer the gap, the more reality feels like déjà vu. But here's the hidden mercy inside this mechanism. The moment you release resistance, the timelines merge again. You resynchronize. The emotional echo dissolves, and the energy that was trapped inside the loop floods back into your awareness as clarity. That's why insights, opportunities, and synchronicities often appear right after surrender. You didn't manifest them. You simply rejoined the present field where they already existed. The illusion that nothing changes comes from living mostly inside emotional time, where everything loops until seen without judgment. Once you observe the resistance without feeding it, the echo loses energy and fades. Life rushes back into coherence. And in that moment of letting go, something subtle yet profound happens. The energetic field reorganizes. What once felt like struggle begins to move with its own intelligence, decisions seem obvious, and paths appear where there were only walls. That transition point, when the observer finally stops fighting the flow, is where the next layer of understanding begins to unfold. There's a moment, small, almost imperceptible, when the observer stops fighting the current. It doesn't come with fanfare or ceremony. It often happens in the middle of exhaustion, when you've tried everything, analyzed everything, and finally realized that nothing you do from tension will ever move the energy forward. That realization isn't defeat. It's the doorway. Letting go is misunderstood. Many imagine it as giving up, as dropping ambition, as turning passive. But in truth, letting go is a higher form of intelligence, the recognition that control is not the same as coherence. Control compresses energy. Coherence releases it. The instant you stop insisting that reality fit your preference, your entire field begins to breathe again. The contraction dissolves, and something invisible starts to rearrange itself around you. If you could see it energetically, it would look like a cloud of static suddenly clearing, revealing fine threads of light connecting everything. Thoughts stop colliding, emotions begin to harmonize, and a subtle warmth enters the body. Not excitement, not relief, but quiet alignment. You can sense it in your posture, in the rhythm of your breath. Your nervous system, once running in loops, synchronizes to a slower and steadier beat. That's coherence in action, the body and consciousness operating as one unified signal. In that state, decisions no longer feel forced. They reveal themselves. You notice options you couldn't see before, not because the world changed, but because your attention stopped distorting the pattern. Life starts to organize effortlessly, the way iron filings align around a magnetic field once the interference is removed. The clarity doesn't come from thinking, it comes from resonance. Imagine holding a musical note for too long, pushing your voice past its natural range. At some point, it wavers and breaks. That's what resistance does to your frequency. Letting go is the moment the note returns to its natural pitch. The strain ends, and everything begins to sound right again. The harmony was never lost. It was only covered by the effort to control the tone. The energetic shift that follows this release is both subtle and immediate. Synchronicities begin to appear, not as proof of magic, but as evidence of coherence. You bump into someone you needed to meet, the right information lands in your path, the conversation that once felt impossible flows easily. It's not coincidence, it's alignment. You're no longer operating in opposition to your own life. The paradox is that the universe often waits for this precise moment of surrender before moving. It's as if reality has been paused, patiently mirroring your resistance until you finally stop pushing against it. The moment you relax, the mirror shifts, and everything you were chasing begins to approach you. You feel it as flow, the effortless unfolding that only begins when effort ceases. There's also a biochemical echo to this moment. When you let go, cortisol levels drop. The heart generates more rhythmic variability, and the brain's hemispheres start firing in greater balance. Your perception widens. You're able to notice details and patterns that were invisible under stress. That's why insight often arrives right after surrender. The system has enough bandwidth again to perceive what was already there. But letting go doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing from clarity instead of control. You still act, still decide, still move. But now your actions are expressions of alignment, not compensation for fear. You're not trying to fix reality. You're participating in it. Every gesture becomes a continuation of the same quiet intelligence that animates everything else. You can test this right now. Think of one situation in your life that feels heavy, something you've been trying to force into place. Take a deep breath and allow the tension you hold around it to rise fully into awareness. Don't suppress it and don't analyze it. Just see it. Then, silently, say to yourself, I allow this moment to be exactly as it is. Let the words sink in. Notice the tiny shift in your body. Maybe the jaw softens, maybe the shoulders drop a little. That's the field beginning to reorganize. That's coherence returning. When you practice this form of surrender consistently, you begin to trust something larger than preference. You realize that life has its own timing, its own intelligence. You no longer need to chase. You begin to follow the current that's already carrying you. The observer, once tense and defensive, becomes transparent. A clear lens through which the universe can see itself moving. And this shift has ripple effects. People around you respond differently. Conversations open up. The energy you once used to resist becomes creative force, not from striving but from resonance. Letting go doesn't end the story. It restarts it on a higher frequency. If you've ever felt that subtle moment, when your body unclenched and everything started aligning on its own, share it. Write a single sentence in the comments beginning with, I felt the shift when, and describe that instant as precisely as you can. Your reflection might be the signal someone else needs to recognize their own moment of release. Like a tuning fork in a quiet room, one resonance helps another find its pitch. And from there, the energy of conscious surrender deepens, the 0 point where time itself begins to lose density, and reality, for a fleeting instant, becomes light enough to reconfigure itself completely. Resistance doesn't always look like tension or anger. Sometimes it dresses itself in light. It smiles, speaks softly, repeats affirmations, and insists that everything is fine. But underneath, the same energy of control is still pulsing, the refusal to feel what's real. That's the trap of forced positivity, when the observer resists by pretending not to resist. This is one of the most subtle forms of distortion because it hides behind spiritual language and good intentions. You tell yourself you're raising your vibration, but what you're really doing is avoiding the frequency you're actually in. You're not observing pain, you're decorating it. You're not releasing tension, you're disguising it as virtue. And the field, which mirrors not your words but your vibration, keeps responding to the avoidance rather than the appearance. You can feel the difference instantly. Authentic calm has gravity. It's grounded, quiet, unhurried. Forced positivity feels like static wrapped in sugar. The smile is slightly too wide, the voice slightly too bright, the energy slightly too restless. It's not peace. It's a nervous system trying to perform peace. The mind says, "I'm happy," while the body whispers, "I'm scared to not be." That split creates incoherence, and incoherence always produces repetition. In this state, you're not aligned with truth. You're managing perception. You become an actor in your own spiritual play, reciting lines that sound enlightened but feel hollow. The irony is that this inner performance blocks the very transformation it's trying to achieve. Real healing can only begin where honesty touches the surface, and forced positivity keeps everything beneath a polished mask. Think about what happens when you're holding back tears while smiling. The body is at war with itself, one system trying to suppress another. Your facial muscles send one signal to the world, while your gut sends the opposite to your heart. The brain receives conflicting information and floods the body with low-grade stress hormones to maintain the facade. You may not notice it consciously, but the tension accumulates. Eventually it bursts, sometimes as exhaustion, sometimes as sudden anger, sometimes as unexplained sadness. The energy you refuse to feel has been quietly building interest. In spiritual communities, this trap can become almost invisible because it's celebrated. You're told to focus only on the light, to stay high vibe, to not feed negativity. But light without contrast is blindness. When you deny shadow, you deny half of the mechanism that makes you whole. The goal is not to stay in one emotional polarity, but to allow the full spectrum to move through without resistance. Consciousness expands through integration, not suppression. From a scientific perspective, this suppression has measurable consequences. Studies on emotional regulation show that when people suppress negative emotions, their physiological stress markers, heart rate, blood pressure, muscle tension, increase, even if they appear calm externally. The surface looks smooth, but the system underneath is vibrating with resistance. By contrast, when emotions are acknowledged without judgment, the body recalibrates quickly. Authentic observation is the shortest path back to coherence. Here's the paradox. The more you insist on being positive, the more you signal to the universe that you're afraid of your own depth. The message you send isn't "I'm aligned," but "I'm unsafe with what I feel." The field responds accordingly, continuing to present situations that mirror that unsafety, until you're willing to see through the disguise. Positivity isn't wrong. It's simply incomplete when it denies the rest of the spectrum. Letting go, the kind described earlier, is not about replacing darkness with light. It's about ceasing the internal war between them. True clarity has no preference. It allows sadness, joy, confusion, and relief to move in and out freely. When you stop labeling emotions as high or low, you stop vibrating in duality. You return to what could be called the 0 point, the balanced field from which real transformation begins. The heart is the perfect example. It doesn't reject pain, it metabolizes it. Every beat is both contraction and expansion. That rhythm is what keeps life flowing. If the heart were to contract endlessly in the name of control, or expand endlessly in the name of positivity, the flow would stop. The same principle applies to consciousness. Forced positivity is a kind of endless expansion without release, and eventually it collapses under its own imbalance. So the invitation is not to stop seeking light, but to stop pretending that light must always feel good. Sometimes the brightest illumination burns. Sometimes clarity hurts before it heals. And that's not a sign of failure. It's a sign that you're moving beyond denial into direct experience. When the observer allows even discomfort to exist without editing, the energy that was trapped inside resistance begins to transmute naturally. The smile that follows isn't rehearsed. It's spontaneous, quiet, real. And from that authenticity arises a deeper frequency, the one that doesn't need to force light, because it is light, born from integration rather than avoidance. This is where conscious surrender begins to reveal its deeper nature, the 0 point, where time and emotion lose density and the observer stands in perfect equilibrium between acceptance and creation. There's a precise instant when letting go stops being a psychological act and becomes an energetic event. You can't force it, you can't time it, and you can't fake it. It arrives when resistance has exhausted its last argument. When the mind, unable to control the outcome any longer, yields to a deeper intelligence. That instant is the 0 point, the space where all polarities dissolve and consciousness stands still, fully awake inside the flow. To understand it, imagine two opposing forces meeting in perfect balance, like the tide reaching its furthest point before turning back. For a brief moment, there's no push and no pull, only equilibrium. In physics, this is a moment of zero potential, the calm between movements. In consciousness, it feels like silence expanding in all directions. There's no fear, no demand, no story, just presence so complete that time itself seems to flatten. The mind stops narrating, and reality reveals itself as it truly is. A dynamic stillness. At the 0 point, surrender becomes more than an attitude, it becomes a state of coherence. Every cell in the body aligns with what is. The nervous system no longer fights the present moment, but entrains to it, like an instrument tuning to the surrounding frequency. You can sense this shift physically. The breath deepens, perception widens, sound sharpens. The boundary between inner and outer begins to blur. What was once me and that becomes one continuous field of awareness. This is the energy of conscious surrender, not giving up, but merging with the intelligence that animates existence itself. It's the moment the observer stops projecting and starts participating. The personal current merges with the universal one, and movement happens through you rather than from you. In that flow, decisions arise effortlessly, not from logic, but from resonance. The next step simply reveals itself as if whispered by the space around you. From a neurological perspective, this state corresponds to a measurable pattern, a reduction in beta brainwaves associated with analytical control, and an increase in alpha and theta rhythms, which accompany deep relaxation and integrative awareness. The heart's rhythm becomes more ordered, brain hemispheres synchronize, and the body produces neurochemicals that support repair and creativity. But the most profound shift isn't biological, it's existential. You realize that consciousness itself is not confined to your identity, it is the field observing through you. In spiritual language, some call this alignment, others grace. But it's not mystical in the supernatural sense, it's a rebalancing of energy toward coherence. When you stop resisting the moment, the flow that was always there becomes perceptible. The 0 point isn't empty, it's dense with potential. Every possible timeline exists there in seed form, waiting for the observer's neutrality to select one without distortion. That's why reality often reorganizes itself immediately after deep surrender, not because you forced a new outcome, but because you stopped constraining what could unfold. The paradox is that this state can't be reached by trying to reach it. Any attempt introduces tension, and tension pulls you away from 0. The only entry is through awareness, seeing resistance clearly enough that it dissolves on its own. When that happens, the mind stops identifying with control and becomes transparent. You no longer think of surrender as a choice, it becomes your natural state of being. In this balance, emotion doesn't disappear, it transforms. Anger becomes clarity, sadness becomes depth, fear becomes precision. The same energies that once distorted your field now fuel your coherence. It's as if each emotion were a wave that, once accepted, returns its energy to the ocean. Nothing is wasted. Everything is reabsorbed into presence. And in this equilibrium, time behaves differently. Moments stretch, synchronicities condense. You begin to experience reality not as a sequence, but as a living geometry, patterns unfolding from a single still point. It's the difference between watching the clock and feeling eternity in a breath. The 0 point is not timeless because time stops. It's timeless because you're no longer separate from its movement. But there's a caution here. If you drift too far into the calm without awareness, you can mistake detachment for freedom. The stillness can become apathy if the observer stops participating in the flow. The art of conscious surrender is to remain awake within neutrality, not to escape into it. To be empty, yet responsive. To allow everything, but sleep through nothing. The 0 point is not an end point. It's a pivot. From here, reality begins to reconfigure around your new coherence. Life doesn't become passive, it becomes precise. Choices feel guided, timing feels exact, and your presence carries a quiet gravity that influences the field without effort. You're no longer reacting or fixing. You're transmitting. And yet, even this state carries its own temptation, the subtle pride of spiritual ease, the desire to stay floating above the noise. But if surrender becomes avoidance, the balance breaks again. That's the delicate threshold ahead, understanding the difference between letting go and giving up. At first glance, letting go and giving up look almost identical from the outside. Both involve stopping the struggle, both appear as stillness after effort. But inside, they couldn't be more different. One is an act of surrender, the other is an act of despair. One expands awareness, the other collapses it. To an untrained observer, they share the same quietness, but the energy beneath them tells two opposite stories. Giving up is the exhaustion of resistance. Letting go is the transcendence of it. When you give up, you shrink. You withdraw from the field, contracting around a belief that nothing will ever change. It's resignation disguised as peace. The energy becomes heavy, slow, muted. The observer stops participating, not because they've found acceptance, but because they no longer believe their presence matters. It's a silence that drains rather than restores. Letting go, on the other hand, is alive. It's the same physical stillness, but filled with presence instead of absence. You release not because you've lost hope, but because you finally understand that control was never the source of movement. Letting go is not stepping out of life. It's stepping back into alignment with it. It's a return to coherence after the noise of effort. You feel lighter, not smaller, clearer, not empty. The difference is subtle but profound. In giving up, the world feels distant, like you're watching it from behind glass. In letting go, the world becomes vivid again. Sound, color, sensation sharpen. You're fully here, but unattached. The observer's gaze becomes clean, no longer filtered through disappointment or demand. It's the difference between closing your eyes to pain and opening them wide enough to see through it. You can sense which state you're in by the quality of energy in your body. Giving up feels like collapse, breath shallow, shoulders drawn in, the spine folding inward. Letting go feels like expansion, a soft exhale, shoulders dropping naturally, the chest open to whatever comes next. Both look like stillness, but one is the stillness of defeat, the other the stillness of trust. There's also a temporal distinction. Giving up freezes time. You step out of participation, and your reality mirrors that pause. Synchronicities fade, momentum dissolves, opportunities seem to vanish. Life stops responding because you've stopped transmitting. Letting go, conversely, accelerates time. The moment you release control, the field reorganizes with startling speed. Conversations happen effortlessly, solutions emerge, paths clear. Reality rushes to meet you, as if waiting for that precise moment of coherence. In psychology, giving up corresponds to learned helplessness, a conditioned state where repeated failure convinces the mind that action is futile. Letting go resembles what cognitive science calls flow, the effortless absorption that occurs when awareness and action merge. One is built on fear of loss, the other on trust in process. Both mark a shift in identity, but in opposite directions. One toward limitation, one toward liberation. The confusion between the two is common because both require relinquishing effort. We're taught that stopping equals quitting, that persistence is always virtue. But what's rarely discussed is what kind of persistence we're practicing. If persistence means forcing what doesn't flow, it becomes resistance in disguise. Real strength lies not in holding tighter, but in knowing when the current itself is wiser than your grip. Think of an archer releasing a bowstring. The arrow's flight depends not on how long they hold the tension, but on the precision of release. If they hesitate or cling, the shot falters. Letting go is that precise release, conscious, clean, timed to harmony. Giving up would be dropping the bow altogether, abandoning the target before the motion completes. One directs energy, the other discards it. There's also an emotional signature. When you give up, relief comes with a shadow, a numbness that follows the collapse. You might mistake it for peace, but it's actually disengagement. When you let go, relief carries light. It comes with clarity and curiosity, as though life just opened its next doorway. You feel capable again, but without the weight of control. That's how the field tells you which one you've entered. Does your stillness feel dead or alive? In deeper energetic terms, giving up closes the circuit of consciousness. Energy stops circulating. Letting go keeps the current flowing, but removes resistance from the line. That's why synchronicity, intuition, and creativity often surge immediately after true surrender. You've restored conductivity to the system. The universe was never withholding, it was waiting for your signal to stabilize. But this equilibrium brings another subtle challenge. Once you experience the relief of true letting go, there's a temptation to remain in that neutrality indefinitely, to float above life instead of engaging with it. This is the hidden edge of surrender, when neutrality turns to numbness and spiritual balance becomes emotional avoidance. The next realization unfolds here, where the observer must learn to remain awake within stillness, to participate in creation without re-entering control. It's the delicate reversal point, where reaction transforms into reflection, and your timeline begins to change from the inside out. There is a precise moment, almost imperceptible, when the current of your life begins to reverse direction. It doesn't happen because you make a grand decision or receive a sign from the heavens. It happens in silence, in the instant your vibration stops reacting and starts reflecting. Until that point, every movement in your reality has been a mirror of your unconscious resistance. But at the reversal point, the mirror flips. Reality begins to take its cues from coherence instead of conflict. You might not even notice it at first. Things that used to provoke you no longer land with the same charge. Conversations you once rehearsed mentally now pass without effort. It feels as if you've stepped 1 degree to the side of your old life, but everything looks almost identical. The outer world hasn't changed yet, but the geometry underneath has. That's the subtle magic of this threshold. Transformation begins invisibly, within the structure of attention itself. To grasp what's happening here, imagine your consciousness as a lens through which light passes. When the lens is warped by fear, control, or judgment, the light bends, and the image projected onto your world distorts. When the distortion clears, the same light produces a new picture, not because the light changed, but because the medium did. The reversal point is the exact second that clarity returns. From that instant on, reality can't mirror the old distortion anymore. The shift isn't emotional euphoria, it's quiet, almost neutral. You don't feel like you've conquered anything. You simply realize that the problem you've been trying to fix has lost relevance. The inner argument stops. You no longer need to prove, defend, or compensate. What once demanded constant thought now feels resolved without resolution. This neutrality isn't indifference, it's power without pressure. From a neurological view, this reversal corresponds to a shift from reactive neural loops, patterns fueled by the amygdala and limbic memory, to integrated cortical processing. Your system stops prioritizing threat detection and starts optimizing coherence. You move from survival patterning to creative patterning. The same brain that once replayed old pain now uses that energy to build new architecture for experience. This is why people often describe sudden clarity or out-of-nowhere synchronicities right after deep surrender. It's not supernatural intervention, it's the natural consequence of coherence restoring flow. When reaction ceases, energy previously trapped in emotional recursion becomes available for creation. The field, which had been entangled with your tension, begins to reorganize around your stillness. That reorganization is what we experience as timelines shifting. At this point, subtle signs begin to appear. Not dramatic miracles, but small alignments that confirm the field is recalibrating. You think of someone and they reach out. A path that felt blocked suddenly opens. A decision you were postponing becomes obvious. Each of these moments is a feedback signal. Reality responding to a new baseline frequency. The shift is self-validating. It doesn't need belief, only observation. But perhaps the most defining marker of the reversal point is the change in narrative gravity. Previously, your story, your identity, your history, pulled you into repetition like a planet's orbit. The same thoughts kept circling, the same emotional charges looping, the same outcomes replaying. At the reversal point, that gravity weakens. The orbit breaks. Suddenly you have access to trajectories that were invisible from within the old cycle. Life starts to respond to who you're becoming, not who you've been. The energy feels lighter, yet more grounded, as though space itself were collaborating. There's less need to manage outcomes, fewer impulses to push or hurry. Paradoxically, things move faster precisely because you've stopped forcing them. The timeline reorganizes not by effort, but by resonance. You're no longer transmitting fragmentation, so the universe no longer has to reflect it back. Still, this stage carries its own temptation. When the field begins responding positively, the mind wants to seize control again. It says, "Now I know how this works. I can manifest anything." And in that very thought, resistance quietly returns. The ego turns coherence into strategy, and the mirror clouds once more. The art is to stay transparent, to allow the unfolding without making it another performance of control. True reversal isn't about flipping polarity from bad to good. It's about transcending polarity altogether. The external world remains dynamic, full of contrast, but your inner state no longer oscillates with it. You've become the still axis around which experience rotates. The observer and the observed begin to share one field of movement, awareness shaping matter, matter refining awareness. And yet, even this shift demands verification. Consciousness loves subtle self-deception. It can convince you that neutrality equals transformation when it's only numbness. The only reliable proof of real change is observation in motion, seeing how reality responds when resistance truly ends. That's why the next step isn't philosophical, it's practical. It's the moment to test your new frequency in the simplest way possible, by choosing one thing you've been resisting and seeing what happens when you stop. There comes a point when all insight must face the field, when the understanding you've gathered can no longer remain theoretical. You've watched how resistance distorts experience, how surrender reorganizes energy, how coherence silently shifts the timeline, but none of it becomes real until you test it directly. Thought must meet matter. The invisible must reveal itself in motion. The simplest experiment is also the most honest one. Take something you've been resisting, a situation, a person, a task, a feeling, and, for a short period, stop fighting it completely. Don't analyze it. Don't try to love it. Don't attempt to fix your vibration. Just stop pushing against it. The mind will protest. It's wired to believe that control equals safety. But that moment of non-interference is the laboratory of consciousness. What happens when you remove your energetic hands from the steering wheel? Most people never reach this point because the ego disguises resistance as responsibility. It tells you that if you stop worrying, you'll lose control, that if you stop trying, everything will collapse. But the opposite is true. When you stop resisting, you stop splitting your energy. You reclaim the portion of your awareness that was trapped in defending a position. That freed energy becomes available for perception, and perception, not effort, is what reconfigures the field. To understand why, imagine reality as a set of frequencies constantly interacting with your own. When your field is charged with resistance, it sends a signal of incoherence, a noise that the external world mirrors back as repeating challenges or emotional echoes. When you stop feeding that noise, even for a moment, the signal stabilizes. The feedback loop changes. Life stops arguing with you because you've stopped arguing with it. You can observe this in small, tangible ways. Let's say you've been frustrated by someone's behavior, a colleague, a friend, a family member. The next time the dynamic appears, resist the urge to tighten. Let your body stay open, your attention calm. Don't suppress emotion, just let it move through without narration. In that neutrality, something subtle happens. The person's energy shifts in real time. Their tone softens, their timing changes. Sometimes the conflict dissolves altogether. It's not manipulation, it's entrainment. Two coherent fields can't sustain tension indefinitely. This is the practical proof of change. The environment stops repeating the same patterns because you're no longer emitting the same frequency. The world reorganizes around your new coherence. You can feel it in your own system, a quiet, almost electric sense of alignment. Time feels smoother, interactions cleaner. It's as if reality exhales with you. The test also reveals where hidden resistance remains. Maybe you find that certain emotions still trigger contraction, or that particular memories still pull you into defense. That's not failure, that's data. It's the field showing you where coherence hasn't yet stabilized. Every reaction becomes a coordinate, a point on the internal map that guides you toward deeper neutrality. Observation replaces judgment. Awareness becomes calibration. From a physiological view, this process is measurable. When you stop resisting, your body exits its stress response. Cortisol and adrenaline levels drop. Heart rate variability increases. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of creative problem-solving, reactivates. In that state, perception expands, and possibilities that were previously invisible become obvious. The change you experience isn't mystical. It's the direct reflection of restored biological coherence. But the most striking proof comes not from the body or even the outer world. It comes from time itself. During resistance, time feels heavy, delayed. Every hour stretches. During surrender, time accelerates. Events cluster, connections form, synchronicities multiply. It's as if reality starts compressing sequences to catch up with your new state. What once took months to resolve begins to shift within days. The external rhythm adjusts to your internal clarity. This test also reveals a deeper truth about creation. You are never trying to manifest outcomes. You are always manifesting coherence. The clearer your observation, the more naturally outcomes align. When you stop broadcasting resistance, you stop summoning the experiences that confirm it. Life doesn't change because you command it. It changes because you've stopped distorting its reflection. Yet, this experiment must be done with sincerity, not as a trick to get results. If you secretly release resistance in order to manipulate reality, you've reintroduced resistance in disguise. The field reads the vibration, not the intention's language. True surrender carries no agenda. It's a full permission for reality to be exactly as it is. And in that permission, paradoxically, everything begins to move again. Try noticing how the air in the room feels when you stop defending against what's happening. The sound of silence becomes different. Space feels alive. That aliveness is the signal that coherence has returned. You're no longer separate from the moment. You've become part of its intelligence. The line between observer and observed fades, and life resumes its natural rhythm. The reality test isn't about proving a philosophy. It's about confirming your participation in a living feedback system. Every shift in awareness has a corresponding echo in the material world. The experiment simply allows you to witness that connection with your own senses. And once you've seen even a small piece of that evidence, once reality has answered your stillness, the relationship between consciousness and creation becomes undeniable. you begin to sense, with quiet certainty, that the universe was never mirroring your wishes or your words. It was always mirroring the frequency of your observation. From here, integration begins. The cycle of resistance, surrender, and reflection completes itself, revealing the deeper rhythm underneath all transformation, the one in which the universe stops mirroring conflict and starts echoing coherence itself. When the observer stops resisting, the universe stops mirroring conflict. Your timeline shifts because the frequency of your observation has changed. Reality was never working against you. It was only echoing the tension you carried. Every surrender you allow rewrites the field. Every moment of neutrality reopens possibility. This is not belief, but physics made personal. Coherence replacing control, clarity replacing struggle. The true creative power was never about forcing outcomes, but about ceasing to distort what already wants to unfold through you. If you felt this message, let it anchor. Write in the comments, "I see the shift," so I know you reached the end consciously. And if you want to keep exploring how awareness reshapes reality, choose one of the videos now appearing on your screen. Follow the thread while the energy is still clear.